He will be there.
When I call on his name,
He will be there.
my God forever the same. Through all the joy, through all the pain, say the word and I'll go where you want me to. Listen to me now.
Hello and welcome to the First 30 Days podcast. I'm Carrie Grant.
And I'm David Grant. And today's subject is going to be suffering and resilience.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I am so excited that we have one of our very close friends here with us, the delightful Bev Sage, who is a British artist, singer-songwriter and a creative director. You are so welcome.
Oh, it's brilliant to be here. Brilliant.
And Bev, we chose you to speak about these subjects because you're one of the best and most inspiring examples we know of someone who has been through suffering and demonstrated incredible resilience to get through. Can you tell us a bit about your story,
where did that
please?
resilience start? Where did you first feel like, I'm going to need to pull on something here?
Well, interestingly, I'd had an incredible career through my 20s and early 30s, really, in the music industry, the creative arts. My husband at the time and life partner and creative partner, Steve Fairney, the legendary Steve Fairney, who I'll refer to as Fairney, he was extraordinary. And we'd just been working together, very like you two. We worked together, we created together, we made albums together, we'd just come back from New York and we had family together. So in 84, we had our gorgeous daughter, Famie, and in 86, our gorgeous son, Jake. So we had a family, we worked together and life was amazing.
You were living the good life.
Yeah. And it was amazing because there were so many aspects to what we were doing and we were trying so many different things. And Fanny had gone back to actually teaching art as well. So there was a day I waved him goodbye. It was the day after his 42nd birthday. And we'd had a great party in the Rock and Roll Diner and we'd all dressed up in American gear, driving Cadillacs, and I'd sung, I Want to Be Loved by You, Just You, because he also did Charlie Chaplin lookalike. So that was a crazy thing. So he went on tour with Marilyn Monroe. So that was my Marilyn Monroe moment. And then we sang, Happy Birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Wow.
So off he went and I waved him goodbye. And I'd been in an article in the local press as Mrs. Fairney, and it was the first time. And we were giggling about me being called Mrs. Fairney because I'd always been Bev Sage, you know. So anyway, off he went and waved him goodbye. And I thought, this is amazing. That night at 4 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at the door. I'd been speaking to Fairney at about 10:30. And he'd settled in. He'd gone off with all his art students on a trip to Torbay, which was where my parents lived and where I'd grown up. And this knock on the door came and we were putting up a lovely teacher from Famie's school at the time who'd fallen out with her boyfriend. And so I thought, oh my goodness, he's come to get her. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. So I was pretty terrified. I went to the door. 2 policemen were there. I went, oh, hi. And they said, are you Mrs. Fairney? And I thought, oh, gosh, yeah, I am. First time I'd been called Mrs. Fairney, twice in 24 hours. Yeah. So suddenly there was something happening and I envisaged immediately a worse death than the death that had happened to Fairney. But they said, we've got the saddest news. Your husband's passed away. And it was like, whoa. You know, he's died. And of course, they came in. It was 4 a.m. They sat with me for the next 3 hours. I don't remember the kids ever waking up and me telling them, but they must have just come by my side and sat with me. And I think initially they probably didn't realise it was their dad. I think they thought it was their granddad. I think they were processing stuff.
Well, you wouldn't, would you?
You wouldn't
really. He's a young man. He's 42.
So life just completely changed. And he'd had an asthma attack. And, 42 students lined the way to his body and the paramedics were there within 9 minutes and they almost got him back. But I think he would have probably been not the same person. And in that sense, Fairney was an extraordinary human being and he would not have liked not being fully him. But that changed everything. Life changed on a penny then. And, we'd worked together. We were family together. Everything we had was together. We'd come from this rarefied Christian background. Steve's dad was a fisherman who became a preacher. My dad was a Baptist preacher, lay preacher, and mum played the piano. We'd grown up in church with life being kind of, an expression of wonderful relationships, music, creativity. And then we got into the music industry, signed to Warner Brothers, done all sorts of crazy things with our creative lives in our 20s and had these children. Then suddenly, boom, he was gone.
When you look back, if it's okay to go back to that time, what in those early days after Fanny's death, how were you coping, and what, did your faith, did the rubber hit the road? You know, when the rubber hits the road, where's your faith? You learn about your faith, don't you, in those moments? What were those early days like?
Initially, it was like a bolt of the most incredible energy. I felt God's almost carrying me and lifting me up high. And I felt this incredible pain for the children and for his mum and dad and for his friends. So I sort of stood above everything in a way, looking at what incredible pain everybody else was in. And we had the most incredible funeral. 1,000 people came to the funeral. It was the most beautiful goodbye. Everybody called it a wedding because Fat and Frantic sang. There was some beautiful music. People like Bono even turned up at the funeral, and that, you know, we had a Duchess, a millionairess, you know, all sorts of 80s faded rock stars and teachers and people that came to see all Fanny's magic shows. So it was a real mix of people and these beautiful sand trays of light. And he was so loved and celebrated, and the village in Clifton sold out of flowers. So it was just the most glorious moment of love and affection, you know, that I could have possibly had. So that was positive.
But go on.
As the months went on, of course, suddenly, I mean, of course, friends were wonderful and picked me up and the kids up, and we went on a rock and roll tour in a way. We went on holiday with lots of people. We were people were really brave taking us on, because it's not easy being around broken people.
No.
It's very brave of people to take you into their lives, you know. And we had the most amazing time in one sense. And I remember Willie, who always did our lighting and does all U2 shows, you know, he said, God, Fanny's gone, but you're on a rock and roll tour, you know, this is fantastic.
So people gathered round you.
Gathered and loved us. But of course, my heart was broken in a million pieces. And of course, whenever I was on my own, which I put time aside for, instinctively, I knew I had to stand with the grief. And I felt it and made space for it. And I would just go into a quiet space, because grief is exhausting. I mean, it's absolutely wearing, and you can't imagine how tiring it is, because I think what it is, you're playing with time all the time. You're thinking, what were we doing this time last week? What were we doing this time last year? What would have happened if he'd been here? So it's very hard to live in the present moment, and that's exhausting. And so all sorts of things happened. I felt carried by my friends, by my faith. And I thought that God was, and my friendship with Jesus and God and the Heavenly Father, it was very much the Heavenly Father in my life carrying me. Yeah. And that was amazing.
In your grief, I mean, how old were the children?
Children were 6 and 8.
In that place of losing your soulmate and being surrounded by friends and by supporters of the family, but you're alone in your own grief, because we all grieve so differently. How did you manage to stay positive for the children who themselves were experiencing their own sense of loss and grief? Yeah,
I mean, that was challenging and deeply, and sometimes I got it remarkably right and sometimes remarkably wrong. And that it's being really gentle with yourself and forgiving with yourself and facing every day, and just hoping and praying that along the way you hold the space that's good enough for them to be in. I mean, I remember Jake particularly, I mean, both of the children were devastated, but in very different ways. And yet, being kids, short memories, so all the time playful. And I remember as a child having a tough time. And that was the moment I found faith as a child of 6, you know, when my mum got very sick and was taken away. So I went back to that, and I always honoured them as adults, really. I always honoured them as fully formed at 6 and 8. They were not different to me. They were obviously when someone dies, everyone loses someone different, you know, whether it's a father, a husband, a friend, or your son or child, you know. And I think what it was acknowledging their grief. They always wanted to say, we've just lost our daddy. If someone didn't know, they'd want to tell that they'd lost their dad. That was
Really?
important to them. They didn't want people not to know. Once they knew, they could play and forget and move on. But it was very important to them that people understood and knew that they were in this kind of
That's
pain
amazing.
when they first met them. And then there was one day when I caught Jake flapping around the sitting room, you know, and he was flapping around, and I said, what are you up to, JJ? And he said, I'm just flapping around. He said, I'm going to practice flying so we can go to heaven, Mum. He said, I'm not liking history. I don't like doing Queen Victoria. He said, I don't like history. So he said, I thought it'd be much better to whiz up there and go and speak to her. So I said, well, that's a great idea.
Wow.
He said, and then when we go, if you come with me, we'll go and see Dad.
In those moments, you must have been caught between kind of kindness and laughing and crying, though. It's so pertinent, isn't it? It's deep
I think
stuff.
that's true. I mean, that's so true, yeah.
And did your relationship with God change at that point? Because I think sometimes we may have a certain, I guess I'm putting it crudely, but you have a relationship with God that is a particular size.
Yeah.
And it fits for the life that you have. And then events throw this all out of proportion. And sometimes many of us feel that our God isn't big enough to be in this space. So did your relationship change, or did you see God differently? Did God grow in your eyes, or what happens in terms of that part?
I'd always seen God as a heavenly father. I think that was the image I've always had. My father was an amazing human being, my grandparents too. And I'd always had this wonderfully positive image, which I know some people don't have because their fathers aren't like that in their lives. But I've always had that really positive holding of faith in that sense. And I became sort of, he became a best friend to me when I was only young as a child. So I had that carrying me. But of course, like you say, that outgrows as you get older and so on. And I just remember before Fenny died thinking people could throw that thing at you about, you know, faith being a crutch and so on and so forth. But I remember after that it was just such a better way of living.
Yeah.
That was what mattered to me, it was just a great way of living. And so many stories in the Bible are full of suffering anyway. I mean,
Absolutely.
you go through Job. Well, I mean, I was crying at his story, so, you know, he didn't need to cry about mine. And there was, you know, there's the suffering servant in Isaiah. There's David, who I really felt connections with on 1,000 levels, you know, not the kingly bit and the male bit, but all sorts of other parts of his story.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just felt so many people have had such, and still do have such a tougher story than me, that was also a way in which I could, I don't know, I had a sense that I would love to have been on God's design team in the very beginning when the world was created. If I would love to have been in that room, you know, painting the fish and doing the thing and working it all out and doing that stuff. And the emotions would have fascinated me. I've always been really interested in what makes someone tick and why they hurt and why they're like they are. You know, I used to read Black Beauty as a kid and get hung up on the Ginger bit where Ginger the horse dies, you know.
Yeah.
Death had always fascinated me, but as a positive thing.
Yeah.
And I thought, God, you've thrown this one at me. Let's go for it, you know.
It's so interesting you said that about the Bible being full of suffering, because obviously in the Bible, Jesus is described as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And during that period, that well, not just the grieving period, but in the aftermath of it, having been with Steve for so long, I mean, having been the Techno Twins, that was your band, having been working together, so you weren't just life partners, you were professional partners, you were creative partners. That, in a way, is a big part of your identity.
Massive.
How did you piece together a different identity?
That was really hard because not only was I letting go of the career, which was one thing, it was also never going to work. I mean, we were struggling to keep going in a way as the two of us. And I think, you know, with the career that's on the road, it's very challenging to keep that going when you've got a young family. So it was already being tough. And not having him, I mean, as parents, there's never enough energy with two of you. So suddenly when there's one of you, no hope, you know.
Yes.
And also, I'm a bit more broken than before. So, in answer to your question, I think, wow, it was really tough in a way finding a new identity. But I had some hooks that were thrown to me. And I always had this feeling that although Steve wasn't with me and I had experiences that I knew we'd never be physically together again, he was right there with me, right with me, cheering me on, like we would be cheering each other on if we were still a team and alive together.
Yeah.
So at the funeral, a couple of people from the BBC said, Bev, if you need a job, come and let us know. We think you'd be great. Oh, right, okay. I'd done some presenting and arts programming and all that kind of stuff for HTV, which was the local station in Bristol. Also, the people who ran the art school said, Bev, would you like a job? You could take Steve's job on. But fortunately, I knew not to jump into his shoes, which were massive. And I just thought they wouldn't get what they really need. And a friend of mine took the job on and she was magnificent and became the best head of art in Weston-super-Mare. She was wonderful. So that was the right move. And I took a job at the BBC, actually.
What were you doing?
Initially researching, and I mean, literally, I had no computer skills at the time, and I got a job
For
on
a
men's
researcher,
health.
that's
And I couldn't.
men's health. I love it.
It was men's health. So I was talking about testicular cancer with Ben Zephaniah, and all sorts of male things. I thought, this is a laugh. God, you're having a laugh. I'm a Scottish widow. I can't talk to strange men about things like this.
Oh my gosh.
So all sorts of things got thrown up into the mix. And then I worked on The Great Antiques Hunt with great producers as well that were on that. So yeah, it was interesting. And I did lots of arts programs. And one of the main things I did was a program with Nick Park, actually, about plasticine called Plasticine Goes to Hollywood.
Nick Parker, of course, does Wallace and Gromit.
Wallace and Gromit.
Yeah.
And the kids had seen the rushes of his programs when they were growing up. So he was a good friend. And I did the story in honour of Steve for that. So I kind of took on art projects that I felt he'd be part of and I could go to a space with him on. So that's how that worked out. And from a faith perspective, I think it was really tough because we had that rarefied sharing of very strong Christian families growing up that were fabulously liberal as well at the same time as being very Pentecostal and Baptist, which is like an odd mix. Yeah. Wonderful. And we had that understanding, and yet we'd been at the forefront of punk and new romantic and all the craziness that happened around us in the 80s and 90s. So, yeah, I missed him hugely.
Yeah.
Now, in our book, The First 30 Days, we talk on day 23 about resilience and the grit that it takes to actually persevere and to get through. And would you mind reading that for us, Beth?
I'd love to. Some say faith is a crutch to make an easier life for oneself, a way to avoid facing difficulties by living in denial and calling it faith. On the other hand, some Christians think once you know Jesus, you're bulletproof, in the special club where nothing can hurt or harm you. None of the above reasoning is true. Having faith in God means we face the same life challenges as everyone else. The difference is, when we're walking with Jesus, is that we have a totally different focus that undergirds and surrounds us. When we find ourselves at the bottom of a very dark pit, lost and fighting, He's always with us. He never leaves us or lets us go. And in that place, as we reach out to find a path, we find gold. Gold that will shape our character and bring a harvest of maturity and a gift that we can pass on to others. As we cry out for change, God shapes our prayers into change my circumstances or change me. Stay level-minded and aware. The enemy of our souls is looking to catch us out, so remain alert. The suffering is for a season and is felt by all believers. Stay strong in the faith. In a while, God, who has great plans for our lives, will bring us into a new season. God knows what He is doing. This is perseverance that bears fruit.
Perseverance that bears fruit.
Wow.
That costs, though, right? That's not something that's cheap or comes easy.
Mm-mm.
And I think for some of us, we think of our lives and we might think, okay, so I've had this really bad thing happen. So now I must be owed some good stuff. Yeah. So this is the next corner is going to be all really good. And then you realise that the lights of the corner are the oncoming train.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The end of the tunnel's
Yeah.
not quite the end of the tunnel.
No.
Yes.
I do remember thinking when after all this happened and gradually as I regained kind of equilibrium in life, I thought, God, I'm going to get some wings now. I'm going to be so wise.
No, you
and
really
I'm
are
not-
bulletproof.
But no. They're still being prepared. This burnishing like gold is still going on. You know,
Yeah.
I think because I'm an artist and love the whole thing about sculpture and the foundries, and you get thrown. I mean, gold is melted at such a high temperature, and to burnish and come out like gold, which is, I think, what our life, our work in progress as Christians and with faith is. You know, it doesn't come easy. You're right.
So in your life, what has been the fruit of perseverance?
Ooh, that's interesting. I think, that's very interesting. I think for me, it's been that thing of being alone and knowing I'm not alone. I think that would be the single biggest thing, because up until Fanny's death, it was such a roller coaster of events and parties and work and children and life and all the things, the busyness of life. But I think after the passing of Fanny, that moment of death and the learning person, I had to stand alone. I had nights and nights on my own and days and times making lots of decisions alone. And I'd try and make it light when people were around me so they still fancied hanging out with me, you know, because people can turn the other way because it can be a bit heavy for other people. And so in that sense, the perseverance was about enjoying being on my own and allowing myself to be on my own. And in that sense, that's when prayer and meditation and that helps, you know. But it wasn't easy. I wasn't very good at it.
And then you had another curveball.
Another curveball flew in.
Yeah.
Yeah, not long after Fanny passed, I think it was 3 weeks, my amazing in-laws said to me, Bev, you know, Fanny loved you so much. He wouldn't want you to be on your own, you know. I mean, what an amazing thing for parents of their beautiful son to say to me. How generous was that?
Yeah, that is.
To give me permission to be whatever I wanted to be and whatever relationships I want to have. So I went into the thing of relationships and oh my goodness, what a minefield. I didn't have problems when I was an adolescent in relationships, but boy, when I was in my 40s, it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
With the children as well. So I had two proposals in one day. One was 30. It was a 30-year age gap. One was 15 years older and one was 15 years younger. And you're having a laugh. Anyway, suffice it to say, I went for the wiser older one and probably should have gone for neither and should have just seen God's humour on that and let it go. But for 15 years, I tried to make the marriage work. By the end of the time, there were some good things there, but he had massive anger issues and it was quite, you know, we'd have new words to describe it now that I won't use, but it wasn't good. And though he was a very kind human being, but it didn't work. And I got very sick and had grade 2 stage 3 cancer, which is pretty intense. You need the battalion of chemo and radio and everything. I lost my hair and was sick, radioactive and, you know, not well actually for a good couple of years. So I left the marriage. We divorced after 15 years. That was the toughest thing. That was where I found it hard and rackled on the gates of heaven going, you know, why did I get this so wrong? Surely you wanted me to love someone well and, you know. So suddenly I'm thinking I'm like Henry VIII, you know, widow, divorced, beheaded, you know, that'll be the next one, you know. Oh my goodness, I got this one wrong. And the kids were just amazing because they took great care of me and they just wanted me to be happy. So I left that relationship. I fortunately had some serious health issues, but have got through them, and I'm really well now, 10 years on. And and I left the marriage. But the hardest thing was in doing that was, of course, everyone sees it differently. And one of the people who took Fanny's funeral, who was my vicar as well, and I loved him so much. He wrote a great reference for my ex in the divorce courts as what a wonderful Christian man he was. And I was like, given this 2 minutes before I was about to go and defend myself, I didn't go into the courtroom with My body was one side, my head was another. And I was just going, God, what's going on?
Yeah.
That was a
That's
moment
awful.
of toughness.
Because then that's betrayal or anger or
felt
all of those things,
awful.
which are sometimes harder to get through, right?
That was hard. That was hard. I mean, people face a lot of tough stuff. And that was really, really tough. I was just like body punched, in that sense. But the wonderful thing was, from other friends who saw what had happened, just wrote the most lovely things. And the other guy who took the funeral, who was just an amazing human being, Bishop James Jones, he was wonderful. My son mentioned what had happened and he wrote me a wonderful thing. And between meeting Theresa May and Prince Charles, he met Jake and gave him mine.
Gave you lovely reference. Wow. Can I just then go to, so you've talked about you lose Fanny. This is, you talk about death. You get remarried. I'm thinking also that's really hard for your children who've got grief. Then there's a new person who they specifically probably got a bond with. Then that marriage doesn't work. So that's really, really difficult. Then you get cancer and it's really serious. You have awful treatment with that.
Yeah.
But then something happens, doesn't it? And I guess, I know David and I didn't come in at the beginning of this, but the most incredible thing is that going back 40 years for David.
Mm-hmm.
So we have known a lovely drummer from the band Imagination.
I met him first 42 years ago in a nightclub in West London when
There
he
you
was
go.
playing in the band Pre-Imagination.
Yeah.
Midnight Express.
Yeah, Midnight Express.
So we've known Errol Kennedy, your now husband, for over 35 years.
Yeah.
We've known you for about 30 or something.
Yeah.
How did you guys get together? It's like, hang on a minute, our friends from way back when, who we've known all these years, who'd have known?
Who'd have known?
Who could have said
and
about
the
that?
remarkable story is that I first met Errol when you'd first met him. Well, 81 was the first year I met Errol. I was touring as Queen of the Rapping Scene with Modern Romance. So I was in America. So we met in a club in Atlanta and we just connected and absolutely hit it off and had a riotous night. We had really lots of fun. And then we toured America and caught up that way. And we just became great friends. And then a year later, Imagination went on their first tour and our record companies were connected. We got the support act as the Techno Twins. So Fanny and I supported Errol and Imagination back in the day. And we went on the road for a year together.
Wow.
So that was amazing. Then we lost touch. And of course, I didn't know what had happened to him. I didn't know what was going on.
He was also a bit like Henry VIII.
We've done a few marriages
He was
between us.
collecting. you guys are collectors. let's just say
I
that.
know.
Connoisseurs.
I think we're going to go up. We're going to be in the L plate class when we go up. We're going to be like, can we talk relationships with you two so we can get you sorted out? Anyway, bless his heart. What happened was your lovely friend Boo, who you loved to bits, and we
Yes,
all
we have a
loved to
mutual
bits.
friend
We
called
have
Boo.
a mutual friend. She said to me, Bev, you've got to come meet people. I was back at art school and I said, no, I'm doing really well. I'm dating dead artists. It's much safer for me. I'm doing Picasso, Salvador Dali. They're great in the daytime. They don't snore at night and I can get some sleep. So it was all wonderful. And she said, no, come on, you've got to meet some people. Let's do this. And she said, come on, you must remember someone. And I stepped onto Portobello Road, which was the lane Fanny and I walked up and down. That's where we lived. And it was like a shaft of light. Errol Kennedy. And we rang him up. I hadn't spoken to him for 34 years. Boo rang him. She said, I've just spoken to him the last month. Shall I ring him up? And we spoke. He was completely thrown. And we were both at this time on our own. And we met up 2 weeks later and never looked back, actually.
I love
That's
this
incredible.
story. Could you tell us what happened over your wedding?
Oh, my goodness. So it was wonderful because Errol and I were travelling. We went to see the family to sort of prepare them that we might commit to each other and, go for it. But of course, we rang David and you straight away to say, look, come on, help us. Can you give us some guidance on this? And you said, more than guidance, we'll give you somewhere to get married. And you were the most incredible support to us, and in a million ways. I mean, we did think it would only be the two of us at the time.
That's right. You and Errol came to our house and you said, it's going to be you and David and me and Errol. It's just four of us. We said, oh, well, if that's what you want to do, then we can marry you. We can do that.
Didn't quite turn out like that. Then.
Just tell us, Bev, how many people came to our front room for you guys to watch you guys get married?
The honest count was about 108.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
108 people turned up.
110.
So you were only out by 106.
Yeah, I'm just never good at maths. You know? I'm just so sorry. Next time. That's another bad room I need to go in.
But right now, this story has a really, it has a happy ongoing.
Yeah.
But can I just take you back a little and ask you a question about suffering and resilience? In the same way that character is a muscle that grows through resistance, just like going to a gym, do you feel that perseverance is the same? Did you find, for instance, that the grit and the strength that you needed to go through your cancer battle somehow was built because of what had happened to you before?
That's a great question, actually. And yes, I think what happened was it goes back to my childhood even, actually. I had an amazing example in my father because my mum was very sick when I was young, and I watched his faith. I watched him, actually, for 50 years of marriage, never see my mum get well. And it was his prayer that she would. And he was amazing. The resilience, the character. So he taught me to live well. And in fact, he taught me to die well. I would say that about my dad. And my grandparents were similar. My grandfather was in the Battle of the Somme, apparently. And, he'd been through a lot. So there was resilience and courage and bravery in the family that I'd seen. And it was also mixed in with faith and great stories of testimonies and things like that. So I think I had that in my growing up as a child in my DNA. And then when my own things hit, I've also got a very playful way of approaching life. And even when I was going through chemo, I mean, Jake and I would do photo sessions and Famie and I would do crazy things and we'd be listening to Titanium on the way in, and anything to make it fun and something not of itself. When I was having radiotherapy, I thought it was like going to a disco, and the lights were laser green and things like that. So all sorts of things that actually would help me mentally and metaphysically, I think, to be resilient to the treatment. And I try to welcome the treatment in because it's like being thrown on the killing fields having chemo. It's horrible for the body.
Yes. And
in a way, by welcoming it in and saying, right, get the hell out when you've sorted me out, please. That was my approach through prayer, through all those kinds of things, but making it playful at the same time. So resilience and courage, I don't think you realise you've got it at the time, but I think when you look back, maybe you think, well, maybe I did okay on that front.
And where did you find God in that suffering?
In the quiet places, really. In the spaces where there was nobody, there was no space for someone to say anything. You were on your own. You were taken to another place within your body and within your soul, I think. And I think it's that quietness, that stillness is where I actually found God. And to know that in that stillness you're not alone is an amazing thing.
Bev Sage, thank you so much for chatting to us today. You are an absolute delight and an inspiration. And thank you for all you shared. Thank you for your honesty, your openness, and your inspiration. Thank you.
You're amazing.
And thank you for listening or for viewing this podcast. The first 30 Days of Walking with Jesus is published by SPCK and it's available online and in bookshops.
The first 30 Days of Walking with Jesus is available in bookstores, online and audiobook. For more information, please visit spckpublishing.co.uk. You have been listening to a Monking Up podcast.